Hi class, today we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite books of all time, Joseph Heller's Catch-22. Catch-22 is a book about World War II that was written during the Korean War and published around the beginning of the Vietnam War. It found much of its resonance with those contemporary audiences. Obviously, the Vietnam War is a war that was steeped in controversy, whereas World War II was considered hallowed ground, a just war, fought against the ultimate evil of the Nazis for the preservation of the human species, a war America was forced into by the attack on Pearl Harbor, a war in which America got to play the hero, riding to the rescue in Europe as England and France floundered against the stronger forces of the Germans and the Italians. However, if you read your war poetry from earlier in this unit, you probably are aware that the modern writer has a very different and cynical attitude towards war than those of the 19th century. This is probably influenced by the implements of war that came into play actually during World War I. The machine gun, poison gas, trench warfare, armored warfare, tanks, air warfare. All of these new technologies dehumanized war. These new technologies made war a numbers game rather than something fought and sacrificed for by human beings. Heller wrote much of his text during the time of the Korean War, which, of course, like Vietnam, was not a war at all, at least by a legal standard. Like the Vietnam War, the Korean War was a war of sketchy loyalties, of confused involvements, and of questionable motivation. Unlike the Vietnam War, the Korean War was not largely televised or reported on by the media in the same way. I told you that Catch-22 is one of my favorite books, and it absolutely is, and it's generally a favorite book of many of the people who actually read it in my class. Of course, it is a little bit intimidating. It is almost 500 pages long, and it cannot be read in a weekend. So please don't try. You will hate me, but really, I told you not to. We read an article at the beginning of the year about narrative bias, and our human instinct to try to put history into stories, even when they don't always match up that well. World War II fit a narrative bias very well. We had good guys in the US, and we had bad guys in Germany, Italy, and Japan. We had a call to action, an unprovoked attack by the Japanese. We had wise mentor figures in the Brits and Churchill. We had a motley crew of allied powers cobbled together from whoever was left standing in Europe and other countries around the world that we got involved. Thanks, Canada. We had climactic showdowns like the D-Day landing. And in the end, we had a powerful self-realization as a country that we, as America, were going to be the superpower for the 20th and 21st centuries. Of course, much of that narrative would have changed, probably, had we lived in a different country. Joseph Heller is aware of the powerful narrative involved in World War II. So aware of it that one of the things that he makes certain to do within his text is destroy the narrative continuity. Catch-22 is not written in a linear order. Sorry. Instead, Catch-22 is told in an episodic fashion, centered around characters, of which there are plenty. So many so that it can be confusing, but don't worry, Heller left us clues. Our main character, though, Yossarian, is a classic anti-hero. Yossarian doesn't want to be a warrior. He doesn't want to be the pilot, the bombardier that he is. He has no desire for glory in war. He doesn't want to vanquish the enemy. What Yossarian wants to do is survive. That's not an altogether surprising thing to want when we're in war. But when we're not in war and we're hearing stories of war, we don't expect our protagonists to only be interested in their own survival. That seems very selfish, and yet probably very realistic. Like I said, there's going to be dozens and dozens and dozens of characters for you to try to keep track of, but many of them have helpful names. We call this name symbolism, in which characters have names that identify their primary traits and help them stand for larger ideas. This happens all the time, by the way. What's the name of that Star Wars character who does everything his own way, kind of operates by his own set of rules? And weren't they being chased by some bad guys? Darth. What happens if I put an in front of their names? And what about this famous Sean Bean character? No, wait, that's Odysseus from Troy. No, that's Boromir from Lord of the Rings. There he is, Ned Stark, from the Game of Thrones series. A guy whose name means severe or bare in appearance or outline, a word that is often used to describe differences in black and white, right and wrong, good and evil, like the unfailingly good Ned Stark compared to his evil counterparts, the Lannisters. There is certainly a stark contrast. Don't like sci-fi? Fine, I got another one for you. Remember this mean girl from Mean Girls? What was her name? Did you know that the Latin root of Regina gives us words like regent and region and means to rule? Regina's name means queen. So here are some character names to consider. Appleby. Although, let's go ahead and pronounce this guy's name Appleby. He is as American as... Kid Sampson is young, and the young, generally naive and innocent, as is his character. Colonel Cathcart comes with a great amount of cacophony in his name, and cacophony generally, especially when it's of those discordant sounds like K's, indicates something unpleasant or disquieting, as is Colonel Cathcart. Major seems to belong to the Department of Redundancy departments, and the redundancy and stupidity of bureaucracy is one of the core messages of Catch-22. There's a guy named Orr. His name is a conjunction suggesting an alternative. Watch for his alternative. His name also means a paddle. There's a guy named Colonel Scheisskopf, and his name literally means... Oh no, I can't say that. He likes parades a lot because he's kind of a Scheisskopf. And finally, Snowden, one of the central characters of the story who has almost no speaking part. We mentioned in our unit intros that snow is often associated with death, but snow as whiteness is also generally associated with innocence and purity. Snowden's death is a central metaphor of the text as a whole. It's also a central image of the text that we visit multiple times during the book. It is from Snowden's death that Yossarian will derive his great epiphany. And because Yossarian is a sympathetic character, it is from Yossarian's epiphany that we should derive our primary theme of the text. Along with constructing a non-linear narrative to emphasize the confusion of war and to break down its narrative bias, Joseph Heller likes to write with a great deal of irony. The Texan turned out to be good-natured, generous, and likable. In 3 days, no one could stand him. He affected an air of jaunty familiarity as he sauntered to the court and prayed silently that he would not be recognized. This sordid, vulturous, diabolical old man reminded Nately of his father because the two were nothing at all alike. Huh? You might say. This is Heller's sense of humor. Hopefully you like it because there's 500 pages worth. Because Catch-22 is about war, it is also very much about death. It is about what death means in the service of a higher cause. It is about what life means to the individual, and whether or not the individual is willing to experience death to trade his life for a larger cause. There are many deaths within Catch-22, and when these characters die, their symbolic values are attacked or destroyed by war as well. So make note of the characters that die. Think about what the author is saying about the nature of war by destroying the characters that he chooses to kill off. Because keep in mind, this isn't an actual war, this is a narrative war. Only Heller decides who makes the cut, who lives to the end of the story, and who dies. Every time he chooses to kill a character, he is saying something. Available on Edline are your discussion questions. You'll also need to download the Catch-22 novel sheet and work on that as you read through. It's highly suggested that you take some time to discuss the book and the discussion questions with your group, because it's a long and difficult book. There are things that you might not catch that someone else in your group does. By combining your powers like Voltron, perhaps you will have a better chance of getting all that there is to get out of this book. After you have finished reading the book, there will be a wrap-up lecture that you should watch that talks about some of the major symbols, some of the major moments that you want to keep track of and remember from this text. Don't leave it till the last night, please. Good luck.